Today on Touching Lives.
I mean, what loving father would allow his son to go through what Jesus went through when it wasn't even necessary? As a matter of fact, it's just the opposite. It is precisely because Jesus did die for the sins of the world and he was raised from the dead that we know that religion is not the way to God. It can't be.
With hope and encouragement for life, this is Touching Lives with James Merritt.
And you may not recognize the name of the street, but you'll probably recognize the picture of it. And the picture that we're throwing up on the screen, this is Lombard Street in San Francisco. It's an amazing street because, and here's what happened, the hill is so steep that it would be too dangerous for cars to travel in both directions. So somewhere around 1922 to 1923, they took this part of Lombard Street that was so steep and they transformed it into a switchback with these 8 sharp turns. And they made it so, number one, you can only drive downhill, you can't drive uphill, and you can only drive east, you cannot go west. And what is amazing is that the most famous street and the most photographed street in the United States is a one-way street. And what's even more interesting to me is nobody complains that there's only one way to go. Nobody gripes that you can't go west, you can only go east. Nobody ever complains that you have to go downhill, you can't go uphill. And that leads me to talk this morning about another one-way street that's just as infamous as it is famous. It's not steep, but it is straight. And unlike Lombard Street, it's the most unpopular one-way street in the world. Now, you say, why is it so unpopular? For 2 reasons. Number one, where it leads, and number 2, who it's named after. Because what makes this street so very unpopular with people is, number one, it's claimed that this street is the only one that leads to God, and number 2, the street is named Jesus. If you brought a copy of God's Word, I want you to turn to the Gospel of John. There's 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke. Turn to the Gospel of John, and I want you to turn to John chapter 14. Let me give you the backdrop of what this story is all about. Jesus had just finished telling his disciples that he was going to die, and then he was going to leave. Now that really upset their apple cart because for 3 years, all they had done 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, was hang out with Jesus. Everywhere that Jesus went, they were sure to go, right? So, I mean, just like sheep follow a shepherd, they walked together, they talked together, they slept together, they ate together, they did ministry together. The only time Jesus was ever apart from them was when he would go up to a mountaintop and pray at night, or he would get all by himself and talk to his Father. Other than that, they were always together. They never went anywhere separately. And now he's just told them, I'm about to leave you, but what really got them was he said, I'm about to leave you, and where I'm about to go, you can't go with me. You have to stay behind. So now they're not only confused, they're really frightened. I mean, they've got a knot in their stomach. What are we going to do? All we've known for 3 years is you. You've been everything we are and everything we have. And so Jesus begins with a word of comfort. We pick up in verse 1. He says, as many of you have heard this before, let not your hearts be troubled. Now, the word there for troubled in the Greek language is a word that means agitated, or it means disturbed. And in effect, what Jesus was saying was, look, guys, when things go dark in your life, when everything doesn't go your way, when you don't pull up the ace of spades in the deck of cards, don't let your hearts be troubled. Now, don't misunderstand what Jesus said because he said something you didn't hear him say, maybe. He didn't say, don't be troubled, because we're all going to have trouble. And we're all going to have things in our life that are going to trouble us. But what Jesus is going to show them is this. Even though you're going to have reasons to be troubled in your life, I'm going to give you an even greater reason never to be troubled. Even though you're going to have a causes at times in your life to be troubled, I'm going to give you an even greater cause not to be troubled. And then what he does is, I want to tell you why you should never, ever let your hearts be troubled. We keep reading. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way to where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? And in answer to that question, Jesus said to him, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. And then just to make sure there's no misunderstanding, no one comes to the Father except through me. Now, I don't have to tell you, if there is any one statement in all of this book that raises more blood pressures and angers more people and ticks off more people and causes more controversy than anything else, I don't think you can show me what it is. And I'll tell you, it flies in the face of what the vast majority of people, both in this country and this world, really believe. I don't know if you ever do Google searches or not. Most of us probably do. Go do a Google search for religious beliefs, and here's what you'll find. There are 37,177 different religious beliefs in the world today. 37,177. And you've got people out there like Tommy Tolerance and Danny Diversity, and they say that every one of these beliefs are equally valid and they all lead to God. Doesn't matter which one of the 37,000 you take, just pick one. Just close your eyes and pick one. They all just take different paths, but they just wind up at the same place. And the opinion that Jesus is just one way among many is a very unpopular concept. As a matter of fact, let's just kind of get honest in this room right now. I mean, let's just really get, just gut level honest. There are a lot of you in this room right now, you kind of squirm in your seat when I read these words. It kind of makes you a little bit uncomfortable. Because there are many people who claim to be Bible-believing, Christ-following evangelicals who believe that Jesus is one way to God. He's a good way to God. You might even sit there and say, oh, no, Pastor, I believe he's the best way to God. But no, I wouldn't say he is the only way to God. Matter of fact, among all the countries in the world that practice religious freedom, we are still the most religious country on the planet. And 2/3 of Americans consider religion to be very important in their lives, 2/3. But of the people in this country who believe that their religion is important, 75% of them believe that many religions lead to eternal life. Only 18% of the people in this country that practice any religion at all believe that their religion is the one true faith. And listen to this. Nearly 50% of the most strongly committed evangelical Protestants, that would be people like most of us in this room, 50% believe that their faith is not the only path to salvation. So the question is, so who are you, the minority, to be telling us, the majority, that we're wrong and you're right and we're lost and you're not? Who are you to say that? Well, let me tell you the good news, because I know you're sitting there right now going, yeah, who are we to say that? Here's the good news. Bad grammar, good theology. It ain't we. It's not me. It's not us. It's not you. I didn't say that. He said that. He's the one that is making this bold, audacious, dogmatic, exclusive, in-your-face, uncompromising, unbending, unapologetic statement. Jesus made that statement. Now, if anybody ever made a statement that they better back up, there's the statement. No one, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me. Now, in case you're sleepy, got up too late, still not with it, just don't have the coffee down yet, let me just kind of really make sure you understand what Jesus said. Okay, in effect, here's what he said. You have a 0 chance of getting to God if you don't go through me. He didn't say, well, you might have an itsy-bitsy, weensy-teensy little chance if you go somewhere else. He didn't say, you might have some chance. He said, you got no chance. You know me. Put it this way. You got as much chance of going to heaven and getting to God without Jesus as I do of becoming a Florida Gator fan. Okay, that's how bad it is. Ain't gonna happen. Just absolutely not going to happen. No chance. I love the story. Some of you heard me tell this. I love the story about this teacher. She was trying to help her kids learn how to spell. So she told the class, she said, I want each one of you to get up and tell what your dad does for a living, spell his occupation, and then tell us what he would do for the class. So a little girl named Mary, she gets up, she goes first. She says, well, my dad is a baker, B-A-K-E-R. If my dad were here, he would give everybody a cookie. She sat down. Next little kid stood up. His name was Tommy. Tommy said, well, my dad is a banker, B-A-N-K-E-R. If my dad were here, he'd give everybody $1. Third kid stood up. His name was Jimmy. He said, well, my dad is an obstetrician. He did everything he could to spell that. He just could not spell obstetrician. So the teacher's trying to be sympathetic. She said, well, sit down, Jimmy. You think about it, and we'll come back to you. Fourth guy stood up. His name was Johnny. Johnny said, well, my dad is a bookie, B-O-O-K-I-E. If my dad was here, he'd lay you 10 to 1. He ain't never going to spell obstetrician. Now, I'm not a betting man. But if I were a betting man, I would lay you any odds and any money. You are not ever going to get to God except through Jesus Christ. You're not. Now, I don't care who you are. I don't care whether you're the Pope or the President. I don't care if you're a senator or a congressman. I don't care if you've been baptized so many times the tadpoles know your Social Security number. It doesn't matter to me. You are not going to get to God unless you go through Jesus. And let me tell you why. The reason is real simple. Jesus says, look, the way to God is not a path. And the way to God is not a philosophy. And the way to God is not a practice. The way to God is a person. And I am that person. So this is what I want you to take out the door this morning. The only way to God is a one-way street that dead ends at Jesus. The only way to God is a one-way street that dead ends at Jesus. Now, let me just stop right here. Because I'm going to say some things now in the next 20 minutes or so. It's going to rock some worlds in this room. I promise you, I'm going to upset some apple carts in this room. Because if you sit there and you say, Pastor, I buy it, I believe it, I'm into it, sign my name on the dotted line. I believe what Jesus said. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I believe that. Then you have to automatically, because of that, you've got to draw 3 conclusions from what you just said you believe. Number 1, we must realize then that religion is not the way to God. If what Jesus said is true, religion is not the way to God. See, one of the consistent threads that runs through every religion in the world is this one. Every religion says their religion is a way to God. As a matter of fact, this is one of the 2 predominant worldviews that dominate 21st century thinking about God and how you get to God. Because beyond that, it's not just that people say that religion's what gets you to God. What people believe is any religion will do. Doesn't matter. Think about this. Let's say that's all that would be necessary. The only thing necessary to get to God, the only thing necessary to be right with God, just have religion. Doesn't matter what your religion is, just have a religion. Doesn't matter what it is. Then here's my question. If that is true, how do you explain the life, the birth, and the death of Jesus Christ? Explain that to me. I mean, I don't get it. Why would he bother? If all you have to do is be a Baptist, be a Hindu, be a Buddhist, be a Muslim, be this, be that, you just got to be something. Why did you leave heaven? Why were you born of a virgin? Why did you perform miracles? Why did you die on a cross? Why did you go through all of that when it wasn't really necessary? Because with all due respect, Good Friday becomes Dumb Friday. I mean, what loving father would allow his son to go through what Jesus went through when it wasn't even necessary? As a matter of fact, it's just the opposite. It is precisely because Jesus did die for the sins of the world and he was raised from the dead that we know that religion is not the way to God. It can't be. I love the story about a pastor who was trying to reach out to a man that was unchurched, and in fact, he'd never been to church, didn't have any religious background whatsoever, and was trying to build a relationship with this guy to try to, get him to the point where he could tell him about Jesus. And he was trying to find a point of connection, and he found out this guy loved boxing. When there was a big heavyweight championship match in town, and the pastor was able to finagle get a couple of tickets on the ringside seats. So he called this guy up and he said, hey, I heard you love boxing. Yeah, Pastor, I love boxing. He said, man, I got 2 ringside seats right out. Would you go with me? He said, man, I'd love to go. So they go down there, and pastor buys him dinner and takes him down. They sit on the ringside there, and boxing match is about to start. Boxers are in there warming up, and just before they ring the bell, one of the boxers kneels down and kind of looks up and makes a sign of the cross. Well, this guy, he'd never been to church. He didn't know what that was, so he looked at his pastor and he said, hey, pastor. He said, what does that mean? And the pastor looked at him and said, doesn't mean a thing if he can't box. it doesn't matter how religious you are. It just doesn't matter. If you're not on a one-way street called Jesus, you're on the wrong street. You can be on the Buddhist street, you can be on the Hindu street, you can be on the Baptist street. You can be on the Methodist street, you can be on the Presbyterian street. But if you're not on the street named Jesus, you're on the wrong street. Because if what Jesus said is true, religion cannot be the way you get to God. Now, it gets worse. Because some of you have already said, oh, I got that figured out. Oh, it gets worse. Because if what Jesus said is true, then number two, we must realize that righteousness is not the way to God. You know, I told you that there are two predominant views in the 21st century how to get to God. One way is religion. The other way is righteousness. As a matter of fact, this really is the number one way people think you get to God. Because let me tell you what, even people of different religions, let me tell you what, I would say probably, I'll be very conservative. 80% of the people in this world, here's what they really believe about getting to God and going to heaven. Here's what they really believe. Good people go to heaven. Good people can get to God. Because here's what they think. Heaven is a good place. God is a good God. Well, this makes sense. Therefore, good people get to go to a good heaven and spend eternity with a good God. And I'll tell you, I've had that proven in my own life. I don't say this to brag, but I'm sure that I've witnessed to thousands of people in my lifetime. And I got to thinking the other day, I don't know how many people I've asked this question to. If you were to stand before God and God were to say to you, why should I let you into heaven, what would you say? And I would say, being conservative, I would say 90 to 95% of the time, these are the responses I get. Well, I try to keep the 10 Commandments. Well, I live a good life. I do my best. I've never murdered my mother-in-law. Now, by the way, here's something I really love when people say. I love this when people say this. You kind of look at them like, kind of skeptical, and they go, now I'm not perfect. Like you had to tell me that, right? Really? Wow, you fool, I thought you were the first perfect person I ever met. So I get it. Nobody's perfect. Let's just say, hypothetically, you could be good enough for God. Let's just say that God said to all of us in this room right now, okay, if you'll be good enough, I'll let you into heaven. You can bypass Jesus. You can bypass the cross. You can bypass salvation. If you'll just be good enough, you can get to me. No problem. Here's the problem. Nobody knows how much good is good enough. You say, well, I'll tell you how I'm going to try to get to heaven. I'm trying to keep the commandments. Well, what percent of the time would you say you keep them? 70. Wow. What if his passing grade's 80? How many do you keep? I've kept 6. What if he says you got to keep 10? So even if you could be good enough for God, you're still sunk. Because number one, you don't know how much good is good enough. And it's even worse than that. Whose definition of good are you going to use? Your definition, my definition, whose definition are you going to use? So what Jesus is saying is trying to tell us this. The highway to God's not a tollway that you build. It's a freeway that's already been built. You just get on the exit. Just get on the road there. And I mean that literally. It's not a toll road you have to pay to get on. It's a freeway that's already been built and paid for. And here's the wonderful news. We saw it a while ago. Anybody that wants to get on the road can get on the road anytime they want to, free of charge. No tolls, no taxes, no fees, free of charge. And so here's why I'm so excited to be who I am in Jesus. Every other religion in the world is a Home Depot religion. Every other religion in the world is based on some system of do-it-yourself. Go to any religion, I'll prove this to you. Go to any of the other 36,176 religions, and here's what they're going to tell you. You got to use a prayer wheel. You got to go on a pilgrimage. You got to give alms to the poor. You got to be baptized. You've got to avoid certain foods. You got to go to confession. You got to perform a certain number of good deeds. You got to pray in a certain way. You got to pray in a certain direction. You got to go through a cycle of reincarnation. And here's Jesus who comes along and says, can I make it real simple? Goodness is not the way to God. Sweetness is not the way to God. Kindness is not the way to God. I am the way to God. So if you believe what Jesus said, you got to say, hey, wait a minute, I get it. Not a Home Depot deal. Religion is not going to get me to God. My righteousness is not going to get me to God. Well, then that only leaves one conclusion. That is, we must realize that only a relationship gets us to God. That's why Jesus goes on to say this, so there's no doubt about what he meant. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now just watch this. If what Jesus said is true, no one comes to God except through me. If what he said is true, then there's one thing I can figure out real easy. All roads don't lead to God. Right, Lisa? All roads don't lead to God. You know why I know that? Because all roads don't go through Jesus. So if I take any road that doesn't go through Jesus, I know I'm on the wrong road. The way to God is a one-way street, and if you're on any other street, you're on the wrong street. By the way, you know what else that means? That means not everybody's going to wind up at the same place. Sorry, we're not all going to be together. So you say, well, tell me why you really believe that. It's real simple. If Jesus was who he claimed to be, and he did what he claimed to do, this has to be true for this reason. Between the human race and us, between the human race and God stands a barrier called sin. We've already established that. There is nobody in this room that's perfect. Nobody would even say they're perfect. Nobody would say there's even been a stretch in their life where there was perfect. We get that because we're all sinners. We've all blown it. We've all done things wrong. We've all got skeletons in the closet. We've all got regrets. We've all done things we wish we could do over. We all did things we wish we hadn't done. We all didn't do things we wish we had, right? So we're all in the same boat. And if we're going to be reconciled with a perfect God, that sin has to be dealt with. And oh, by the way, not only does your sin have to be dealt with, here's the kicker. It doesn't have to be dealt with to your satisfaction. It's got to be dealt with to his satisfaction. We owe God. He doesn't owe us. We owe God a debt payment called sin. And that sin payment's got to be paid not to your satisfaction, but to his satisfaction. So Jesus comes along and says, look, I get it. Sin demands a payment. And I'm going to come and I'm going to make that payment because I'm the only one that can. You didn't live a perfect life. I did. You can't die a perfect death. I will. You won't come back from the tomb. I can, and I did, and I have. And I paid for what you can't pay for. Because at the end of the day, hear this and hear it clearly, somebody's going to pay for your sin. Either you're going to pay with your soul or you're going to accept the payment of his life. But somebody is going to pay. So let me help you with this. If your home is on fire, you better call a firefighter, not a policeman. If you break a leg, you better call a doctor and not a firefighter. If your home is broken into, you better call a policeman and not a doctor. If you're drowning, you better call a lifeguard, not a plumber. And if as a sinful human being, you want to come to a righteous, holy God, you better call a Savior. Because he is the only one that can get you there. There's only one way to Jesus, and that's Jesus. There's only one way to Jesus, and that's Jesus. And see, this is what I love about Jesus. This is why I fall more deeply in love with Jesus every day of my life. It's why I know some people ask me, man, you're so passionate, and you talk faster than any guy I've ever heard in my life. I know, I talk 200 miles an hour with gusts up to 6. But I'll tell you why. Because so far, ever how long this earth's been here, he's still the only man that came to this planet. And he didn't say, come to me and I'll show you the way. He said, come to me, I am the way. He didn't say, come to me, I'll tell you the truth. He said, come to me, I am the truth. He didn't say, come to me, I'll give you life. He said, come to me, I am the life. And there's some of you in this room right now, and you're sitting there and you're kind of wiping your brow and blowing out that breath and say, man, I know him, Pastor. I know him personally. I know him internally. I know him eternally. Really? Yes, sir. Really? Yes. Then you have a responsibility to people who are lost to show them the way. We have a responsibility to people who are deceived to tell them the truth. We have a responsibility to those who are hopeless to give them the life. So I'll admit to you, it is not politically correct to say it. I get that. Political correctness has never been one of my strengths. But it's true nonetheless. If you're here today and you're lost, Jesus is the way to God. If you're here today and you're confused, Jesus is the truth of God. If you're here today and you're hopeless, Jesus is the life from God. Yes, it is a one-way street. But I'm one customer that will tell you, it is the best street you will ever take.
God's one-way street is the best street you can ever be on. He is the way, the truth, and the life. Easter reminds us that through His resurrection, we can live the greatest life of all. Do you need to know more about a saving relationship with Jesus? Call us today at 800-413-1131. It is not our religion or our own goodness that makes us right with God. It is Jesus that reconciles us with God. His death, burial, and resurrection tell us no one comes to the Father except through Him. Dr. Merritt removes the noise of thousands of different ideologies and breaks down exactly what Jesus had to say with the message One-Way Street. Order your copy today by calling 800-413-1131, 800-413-1131, or go to touchinglives.org. CDs are $7 each and DVDs are $12 each. The good news of Easter is summarized in Matthew 28, for He has risen, just as He said. Thanks to the prayers and financial support of our donors, we can share that good news all over the world. Happy Easter from all of us at Touching Lives.